This is the Jasper Park Lodge, one of Canada's most charming hotels, nestled amidst the towering Canadian Rockies. Join me for 2 unforgettable nights inside one of Canada's final Grand Railway hotels built a century ago, from an incredibly well-crafted culinary experience to some of the coziest accommodations I've experienced so far, and an outdoor hot tub in an environment you have to see to believe, where comfort converges along the Continental Divide in a town that will win your heart over in so many ways, and one of the coolest railway hotel experiences I've had to date. This is the Jasper Park Lodge. Let's begin. Last summer, I started a series to visit Canada's Grand Railway hotels built in an era when passenger trains ruled the Rockies. The Banff Springs Hotel, the Chateau Lake Louise, the Palliser in Calgary, Hotel Vancouver, the Fort Garry Hotel in my hometown of Winnipeg, the Royal York in Toronto, Hotel Macdonald in Edmonton, and probably my personal favorite, the Bessborough in Saskatoon. And the Jasper Park Lodge was my final episode, but 2 days before my stay, a wildfire tore through the park, reducing 30% of the town to a pile of rubble. Now this episode is my tribute to the town of Jasper, and picks up right where I left off last summer, but to truly tell the story from the beginning, we need to rewind over 2 centuries ago to 1810. In 1810, the area we know today as Jasper saw European explorer David Thompson become one of the earliest to chart the Northern Rockies through the Athabasca Pass. And this pass, later known as Jasper House, would soon become Canada's biggest fur trading post for both the Hudson's Bay Company and Northwest Company. But it wasn't until 1872 when the Canadian Pacific sent scouts to find a route to pass their transcontinental railway through, and they favored the north because it followed the Athabasca and Fraser Rivers all the way to Vancouver, but would eventually abandon it in favor of the steeper, more treacherous Kicking Horse Pass through Banff at the request of Canada's Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald. 1873 saw Canada's first Prime Minister voted out of power, but he would win it back 5 years later in 1878 on the promise to complete a coast-to-coast railway to get British Columbia to join Canada, with the strategic choice to use the railway as a southern border to discourage a possible American invasion. And considering the Canadian government gave the Canadian Pacific this land for free to build the railway, when the Prime Minister said to route it through Banff, that's exactly what happened. Now the Yellowhead Pass through Jasper laid untouched for 2 decades, until the Grand Trunk Railway would lobby newly elected Canadian Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier to pass a northern railway through the Rockies en route to the Pacific. The government agreed and would fully fund the railway from New Brunswick west into Winnipeg, where a newly formed Grand Trunk Pacific would take over. They reached Winnipeg by 1906, Edmonton by 1909, and by 1911 they would reach today's Jasper town site, laying track through the park over the Yellowhead Pass, finally making it to the Pacific at Prince Rupert by 1914. Now, when we think of the last spike in Canada, most people think of Craigellachie, BC, just outside of Revelstoke, when the Canadian Pacific completed their route in November of 1885. But the Grand Trunk Pacific's last spike was driven home in Fort Fraser, about 150 kilometers west of Prince George, on April 7th, 1914. And President Charles Melville Hayes was a huge catalyst behind all of this and was super eager to defeat the Canadian Pacific. He envisioned a route that was superior in every way, from scenery to the Castlesque hotels along all the major stops. And the Chateau Mount Robson was the perfect example. He believed it would challenge the Chateau Lake Louise, because the tallest peak in the Rockies, along with Berg Lake, would easily sway tourists to stay in Mount Robson over Lake Louise. And in Jasper, the Chateau Myatt would top the Banff Springs Hotel, since Myatt's hot springs were hotter, all bringing tourists to travel towards the edge of the Pacific in Prince Rupert, and Grand Trunk Pacific's soon-to-be metropolis of the north, with a vision to become essentially what Vancouver is today. And the king of this lineup of luxury hotels was the Chateau Prince Rupert. It would stand 15 stories high, with a dining room more luxurious than the Palm Room at the Fort Garry and Hotel Macdonald, totaling just shy of 500 rooms, which, for context, is what the Hotel Vancouver hosts today, all while serving passengers by rail and ocean liner heading to and from Asia. But Hayes would never see the completion of his route or railway hotels, because in April of 1912, he was returning from Europe after securing more funding for the Grand Trunk Pacific, and he would board the Titanic in first class with the goal of discussing a business deal to ensure the White Star Line would transport passengers from Europe to board a Grand Trunk Pacific passenger train across Canada. But at 2 a.m. on April 15th, Hayes went down as a gentleman and refused to board a lifeboat before all women and children did, and he would ultimately perish in the icy waters of the North Atlantic that night, leaving behind a legacy and a vision that really pushed the envelope for the day. And if he had lived, I'd like to believe, in my biased opinion, Canada would look quite a bit different today. Now back in Jasper, the Chateau Myatt was slated to be more luxurious than all the Grand Trunk Pacific hotels that exist today, including the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa, Fort Garry in Winnipeg, and Hotel McDonald in Edmonton, but due to the Canadian government's unwillingness to grant exclusive land rights, Grand Trunk Pacific never broke ground on it, and by the time they drove home their last spike in April of 1914, the Canadian government was desperate to get any form of accommodations up in Jasper. So in February of 1915, they approved the Chateau Mayette, but too little too late, as World War I had already broken out, and as Canadian rail travel grinded to a halt, so did Grand Trunk Pacific's construction on all the hotels in an attempt to finish one of them, which was the Hotel McDonald in Edmonton, the furthest along of the remaining 5. And the rest would never see completion. Jasper would sit quiet until 1920, when the Grand Trunk Pacific went belly up and were absorbed into the newly formed Canadian National Railways. And in 1921, newly appointed CN President Henry Thornton wanted to pick up the project, and in June of 1922, the Jasper Park Lodge would open as the world's largest single-story log structure, using timber cut from the nearby Malign Canyon and a scattering of cabins along Lake Bouvert, which was a dramatic design departure from previous hotels. Rather, CN had envisioned a resort that blended into the landscape rather than dominating it. Although I gotta say, a chateau hotel towering above Jasper today would truly be something special. Let me know in the comment section what you think. Between 1927 and 1931, capacity grew to 550 guest rooms, including the newly completed Jasper Golf Course, which is a course fit for royalty, and even King George and Queen Elizabeth stayed here at the lodge during the Canadian War Tour of 1939, as well as Marilyn Monroe a few years later. And the lodge was a huge catalyst to bringing tourists to the edge of the Northern Rockies on trains like this, where passengers would come and arrive at the Jasper Heritage Station to begin their vacation across the Athabasca at Canadian National's most popular Grand Railway Hotel. However, the good times would end in 1942. World War II forced the lodge to close down until the reopening in the summer of 1946, but the worst was still yet to come, because on July 15th of 1952, faulty wiring in the lodge sparked a blaze that would consume the entire main cabin in less than an hour. And with phone lines severed from the fire, the town's fire department arrived too late to save anything, and since CN owned the hotel, they actually moved a bunch of mattresses into CN boxcars and let guests sleep in there for the night, before going to the Hotel McDonald in Edmonton the following night. But it was less than 2 weeks after the fire where work began on a new $3 million, 23,000 square foot replacement, and on June 9th of 1953, less than 1 year later, the new Jasper Park Lodge was reborn in the format that you'll recognize today, with a fireproof design blending steel, fieldstone, and cedar with a touch of resiliency. And the lodge was a part of Canadian National's growing portfolio of railway hotels by the 1960s. And this would include the Hotel Vancouver, Hotel McDonald, Bessborough in Saskatoon, Fort Garry in Winnipeg, Chateau Laurier in Ottawa, and the newly opened Queen Elizabeth in Montreal. But by 1988, CN was hemorrhaging money at an alarming rate, and desperate to get out of the hotel business, Canadian Pacific would purchase all of CN's hotels, with the exception of the Fort Garry and Bessborough, as they were sold off privately a few years earlier, and the Jasper Park Lodge was a part of that acquisition. CP's goal was to transform the lodge into a year-round resort, just like they had done with the Banff Springs and Chateau Lake Louise. And by 1994, a 5-year restoration breathed new life into the property, and following in 2000 when Canadian Pacific bought Fairmont Hotels and would rebrand all their hotels as Fairmont, that brings us to today in 2025 for 2 incredible nights inside one of Canada's most famous Rocky Mountain resorts. Now last week, Belle and I hopped on the train in Vancouver, where we would spend the next 24 hours aboard heading out of Metro Vancouver through the Fraser Canyon, where the next morning we were treated to what I can only describe as the perfect picture postcard type of day in the Northern Rockies as we would head into Jasper National Park. And I really wanted to fit the Jasper Park Lodge into our railway hotel series, but the rates, which were pretty pungy for my taste, and coupled with the fact that the train only departs 2 days a week, made it pretty much impossible to do this journey together. So this journey actually begins by car, heading east on the Coquihalla Highway, passing through Kamloops, and tracing Highway 16 into Valemount, BC for the night, where the following morning we were treated to a breathtaking sunrise over the Robson Valley, and as we passed Canada's tallest peak at Mount Robson, we would cross the Continental Divide into Alberta, where we would soon arrive into Jasper. And you could not have picked a better day, because sunny winter days in Jasper like this are a rare but special treat in the Northern Rockies, as it's usually pretty cloudy and overcast. But from the Jasper town site, we would drive east, crossing the Athabasca River, and winding along the scenic back road to reach the sprawling 23,000 square foot property that composes the Jasper Park Lodge. Nearly 500 rooms and suites, with the main lodge right here in the middle of it. And upon check-in, thanks to my Fairmont Gold status, we got a great upgrade to a Lakeview suite, which is only a few steps away from the main lodge, as you see here, and it did not disappoint. Oh wow, this is pretty big. Now, why Jasper? And if you've never been to Jasper, or maybe you've never heard of it, here's why. Jasper is everything that I wish Banff could be. It's much quieter, it's more peaceful, and it retains a really strong sense of community that I actually really admire about Jasper. And it's all tucked into the northern heart of the Canadian Rockies. And I don't have any stats to prove this, but in my experience, if you want to see wildlife, Jasper is the place to be. Because I've been lucky enough to check off quite a few animals off my wildlife checklist, whether it be from the side of the train, or around town, or this red-tailed fox digging into some garbage around the lodge. If you come to Jasper, I'm pretty confident you'll see quite a bit of wildlife here too. But in Jasper, it's not just about the nature, it's about great food, cute shops, and sometimes just a cup of joe with some fantastic scenery that's going to get you reaching for your phone like I was here. And Jasper is also double the size of Banff, so if you're tired of being shoulder to shoulder with 10,000 tourists and being surrounded by 30,000 cars in the township of Banff, Jasper's the place to be. It's also home to some outstanding scenery and world-class hikes, and this couldn't be an episode in the Grand Railway Hotel Series of Canada without pointing out that the Jasper Heritage Rail Station, yes, it has served passengers since it was built in 1926, but beside it lies the iconic Canadian National 6015 steam locomotive, a relic from an era when rail travel was king, standing proudly outside the station since it was placed here on display in 1972. She would spend most of her life traversing passengers in and out of Jasper, and was actually one of only 20 Canadian steam locomotives that would escape the scrapyard after the full-time switch from diesel in the 1950s. Now, of course, you should never ask a lady about her weight, but this is the one exception, and this girl clocks in at over 500,000 pounds. And that doesn't even include anything that she was pulling. And the land that she currently occupies right now is actually where Jasper started when Grand Trunk Pacific ran the first passenger train through here in 1911, but would be renamed the following year in 1912 after the Jasper House fur trading post. Originally, Jasper was just a workers' camp en route to the Pacific and Prince Rupert, but quickly became a focal point to draw tourists through the Northern Rockies, and following Grand Trunk Pacific's 1920 bankruptcy and absorbing into the newly formed Canadian National Railways, from 1920 until 1978, Canadian National would operate its daily passenger service through town here on the Supercontinental, and that originated in Montreal and Toronto, heading west into Winnipeg, Saskatoon, Edmonton, here in Jasper, but instead of heading north to Prince Rupert, they would follow the Canadian Northern Railway route south, arriving on the west coast in Vancouver outside of Pacific Central Station, which is actually why you see the mile countdown outside the Jasper station as 2,500 miles from Montreal and 500 from Vancouver, because that was the transcontinental route that this station served back then, despite today it serves Vancouver to Toronto on the Canadian, because Montreal and Ottawa were removed by the Canadian government on the transcontinental route in 1990. And don't worry, I'll cover all this and more in an upcoming episode where I'll take the Rupert Rocket from here in Jasper all the way north into Prince Rupert later this summer. Now you can probably tell that I'm a pretty outdoorsy kind of guy, and the lodge truly transforms into a winter wonderland during slow season. And whether that is skating on a frozen lake, which the hotel actually offers complimentary skate rentals for all guests, so Bella could skate while we got to enjoy a little bit of vitamin D out in the sun. But if you're a little bit more adventurous, you can take a cold plunge like I did here in the icy waters of Lake Beauvoir, which is actually French for beautiful green lake, as the lake turns into a turquoise blue in the summer, very much like you'd see at Lake Louise and a lot of the other Rocky Mountain lakes. Although I did do the same cold plunge last year at Two Jack Lake during our stay at the Banff Springs Hotel, I think the cold plunge in Jasper was a lot more enjoyable. Now inside, the lodge seriously embraces the Christmas spirit with unlimited complimentary hot chocolate. And I'm not just talking about your average prepackaged hot chocolate. I'm talking about a scratch-made, chef-inspired red velvet hot chocolate. But seriously, whoever is making this red velvet hot chocolate needs a raise, because this stuff is dangerously good. And I probably guzzled a dozen too many of these during our stay, but they have a hot chocolate bar as well where you can doctor it up with shaved dark chocolate, whipped cream, marshmallows, you name it. Although majority of our stay, this entire bar was empty and not replaced. I'm sure that when it's full, it's a good time. And they even have a dedicated cabin to meet the big man. he did tell me, hey listen Trav, I think there's a chance you might end up on the naughty list this year. With the current gas prices, I think coal may actually be the gift to get. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Now back in the main lobby, you'll see on the left hand of the screen a gingerbread house. And it's actually real. This is a massive wood structure with individual pieces of house-made gingerbread secured onto the frame and decorated accordingly. And it perfumes an incredible gingerbread aroma throughout the entire main lobby. I mean, the Hotel Vancouver also does a gingerbread house of their property. Last year they had a model train to accompany it, and this year they actually did a more accurate rendering with the Georgia and Hornby streets with cars surrounding it, which I think is pretty cool. But I gotta give a split decision to the Jasper Park Lodge on this one. It's way bigger, it smells amazing, and I'm not gonna lie, it was super tempting not to take a bite out of this thing during our 2-day stay. But let's also not forget about the legendary outdoor pool, because when Canadian Pacific built the Banff Springs, President Cornelius Van Horn envisioned a hot pool at the front of the hotel that would be a staple. And you can bet that when Grand Trunk Pacific President Charles Melville Hayes envisioned the Chateau Myatt in Jasper, his vision had to be grander and much larger than Van Horn's, a story as old as time. And although the Chateau Myatt never came to be, the Jasper Park Lodge took that concept and brought it to life here with a hot pool on the edge of the lake, heated to a blissful 80 degrees Fahrenheit, surrounded by snow-capped peaks, and you could easily spend hours here every single day. I know we did during our stay, although I don't know if it would have the same effect on me in the summertime since I'd probably want to be swimming in the ice-cold lake, but in the wintertime, it doesn't get any better. And I actually think it was at this moment that Bella told me she wanted to come back here every Christmas for the remainder of time. And if I had to pick between the Jasper Park Lodge or the Banff Springs, I'm going to give the Lodge the unanimous decision here, because the Lodge has not just a pool but a hot tub, which is amazing in the winter by the way, but the Springs only has the outdoor pool with an indoor hot tub. And you know what time it is.
You know what time it is. Cannonball!
Now, dining at the Jasper Park Lodge is a treat. The culinary offerings here at the Lodge include the Emerald Lounge, the Great Hall Gastropub, and Orzo Buffet. And although all three have been around since 1953, check out these incredible archive photos I was able to dig up in the 1922 version of the Lodge, and tell me this isn't absolutely stunning. And although I could only imagine what this would look like under today's management, considering that the 1970s saw Canadian National and Canadian Pacific trying to sell off or demolish as many of their hotels as possible, which included Mount Stephen House and Field, the Royal Alexander in Winnipeg, Prince Edward Hotel in Brandon, Manitoba, or the Hotel Newfoundland in St. John's, the fact that Canadian National invested $3 million in 1952 to rebuild the Lodge may actually be the primary reason they couldn't justify tearing it down or selling it off privately earlier, and why it still stands today. Now, our first sitting at the Lodge was for lunch in the Great Hall Gastropub, and as you can tell, the environment in here is fantastic. Again, the sun shining in on a rarely sunny day in Jasper through the dining hall. It's about the small things. You gotta appreciate the small victories in life. And as far as the dining options go, I'm a simple man, so I went with the butternut squash soup, which was absolutely fantastic, by the way. I love a good soup, especially in winter season. Nothing hits better. Although my caramelized onion, pear, and brie grilled cheese actually didn't have any caramelized onions in it at all, and the bread was actually pretty soggy and overall just lacked any flavor, which I thought was pretty disappointing. Bella, on the other hand, got the mushroom spaghetti, which was absolutely top-notch. Was a little bit skeptical after lunch, but we ended up deciding to give dinner a chance, and the Lodge absolutely redeemed itself in every single way. My French onion soup to start was perfection, and Bella's crispy Brussels sprouts weren't too far behind. And for drinks, Bella got the eggnog, and it's pretty strong, so I think at this point I don't think she could remember if we were at the Banff Springs, the Hotel McDonald, or the Jasper Park Lodge.
Julian! I don't know where I felt like I get a little drink around here, do you, bud?
So I ended up going with the house-made ginger ale, which was good. I don't know if it's worth $14 for a scratch-made ginger ale, but as far as mains go, Bella got the fish and chips. The haddock, by the way, was perfectly fried. The triple cooked french fries, which, although technically more of a potato wedge, the seasoning was outstanding. I got the crispy skin salmon with hollandaise and fondant potatoes. And although it's a little bit disappointing because my salmon skin was soggy by the time I got to the table, which, I mean, that's the whole reason you order crispy skin salmon. The salmon itself was cooked fantastic. Great hollandaise. All in all, much better than lunch was. And as far as sleep goes, I fell asleep in minutes here, but it's not because of the comfortable beds, it's because of today's video sponsor, Manta Sleep. The Manta Pro Sleep Mask makes it easier to fall asleep anywhere, anytime, guaranteed. And whether you're sleeping on a moving train like I was in this series, or the countless hotels along the way, I mean, look at Bella. If you had come down from Mars and had no idea what was going on, you would have sworn she was hibernating for the winter. And the Manta Pro sleep mask that I'm using here has true 100% blackout, unmatched breathability, zero pressure on your eyes, and it is engineered for anybody that likes to sleep on their side. And it's also got an anti-slip strip. And if you're still on the fence for some reason, I'm going to make it even easier for you by getting you 10% off your Manta Sleep mask today when you click the first link in the video description and use my code TRAV, that is my name, TRAV, for 10% off, the best night's sleep money can buy. And thank you so much to Manta Sleep for making this video possible. Get a sleep mask today. Now, the breakfast buffet the next morning offered probably one of the most extensive spreads I've seen to date at any hotel, with everything from poached eggs and shakshuka to the lodge's signature Bouvert French toast. Bacon, chicken sausages, pork sausages, fluffy scrambled eggs, and unlimited hot cups of joe. Bella told me that she thought this was the best culinary experience that we'd had to date in this series, but for me personally, I'd have to put it at the number 3 spot, as it doesn't quite dethrone the Palliser in Calgary or the Best Burl in Saskatoon as my number 1 and 2 spots respectively. Now, I can't do this video without touching on the wildfires from the summer, and the reality is that 30% of the town no longer exists. And it's safe to say that there are some really challenging times ahead for this community, but I think it transcends a universal message that, to be honest, really inspired me to start this series, and it's that nothing lasts forever, and enjoy it while you can. And although I can't fix any of these problems, I can shine a light on some incredible local gems like the Bear's Paw Bakery and Cafe, which actually recently rebranded as the Lost Lands Cafe, and they actually invited me in to come down and get an appreciation for their world-famous white chocolate and raspberry scones. They even had me throw on an apron and get some elbow grease into crafting some of their signature sticky cinnamon buns. And let me tell you, there's nothing on this menu that disappoints. Even their coffee, which they're serving up from a real roaster down the road in Valemont, a ski town with a population of about 1,000 people, and here outside the trading post, Vale Coffee is a serious highlight. This is Elliot, he's the owner, and he's roasting beans a couple times a week and serving up everything from dark roast to decaf, espresso, and more. They even got some incredible baked treats behind the counter that his wife is turning out in the back. They also ship Canada-wide, so if you want to support someone really awesome, really local, and you're in the market for some new coffee, I'll put a link down in the video description to check them out. But there's a lot of hidden gems here in Jasper, including the Bear's Paw Bakery. Now, traditionally, all the railway hotels had Royal Mail service, because when the hotels were built, all of Canada's railways were the backbone of Canada's mail service, moving parcels, letters, and everything in between by rail. So obviously it made sense that the hotels had a built-in daily mail service so you could stay and send a letter to your loved ones back home. And last year when I stayed at the Hotel Vancouver, I ended up writing a letter home to my mom in Winnipeg to let her know, first off, how much I love her, and also how excited I was for our upcoming trip at the Fort Garry. And at the Best Burl in Saskatoon, I sent Bella a letter to tell her how excited I was for our stay upcoming at the Hotel McDonald in Edmonton. Now, sadly, the Jasper Park Lodge, for whatever reason, never got Royal Mail service, and although I did get a few complimentary postcards, which you see here, I was a little bit bummed that they didn't have any room to write anything or any personalized messages on it, because I would have loved to have repeated that experience, but I'll be staying at plenty more railway hotels coming up in the near future, so stay tuned for that. Now, let's talk about price, because the Jasper Park Lodge ain't cheap. And like most of the stops that I've made in this series, I paid for the stay myself. Now, I paid about $300 a night with the BC Residence discount, which is an absolute smoking deal compared to the average rate of over $1,000 a night that they charge from May until October. Now, it's also worth noting that all the railway hotels in national parks have hidden national park fees of $50 a day, a $10 a day tourism fee, marketing fee, and a few others which personally I find a little bit greasy because they don't exactly include those in the rate when you book, but those fees do go towards complimentary skate rentals, all the hot chocolate that I guzzled during our stay, as well as a meet and greet with Santa. And at least you get some value for those hidden fees, and unlike all the other hotels in this series, the Jasper Park Lodge actually has complimentary valet service, which some hotels actually charge $50 to $80 a day for, and considering how spread out the property is, this is a great welcome addition. And they also have complimentary shuttles to take you from the lodge to the ski resort, skating, into town. So if you do end up doing things the traditional way, which I really wish I could have done it this way, but just costs weren't allowing to, and you take the train from Vancouver, east into Jasper, or from my birthplace in Winnipeg, west through Saskatoon and into Jasper, the lodge has a complimentary shuttle that will take you to and from. Oh, and also a shout out to our shuttle driver, because this dude was legit driving it like he stole it. Kind of funny, but it's little things that I appreciate. And at the end of the day, this is just another stop in my series across Canada to stay at as many of the Grand Railway hotels as possible, but the Jasper Park Lodge is different. It's by far the most peaceful retreat that we've had to date, From the abundance of wildlife around the property, an environment that really brings out the festive spirit in the incredibly comfy, cozy cabins, or the outdoor hot tub that I could probably spend all day in, to be honest with you. Not to mention the breathtaking landscapes that surround you from every angle. The Jasper Park Lodge is a stay that I cannot recommend enough, and considering how much this town needs your tourism more than ever before, I hope that this video convinces you to come experience the uncommercialized beauty in the northern Canadian Rockies. And yeah, the lodge probably pales in comparison to what could have been if Grand Trunk Pacific had found a way to bring the Chateau Myatt hot springs to life. I'm just thankful I got to experience an integral piece of Canadian history and share it with somebody that means a lot to me. And I'll cover the whole Grand Trunk Pacific story a lot more in depth in that future episode I mentioned earlier, going out to Prince Rupert this summer. This series is my love letter to Canada and the railways that built it. From downtown Montreal to the west coast and Vancouver, from the prairies of Winnipeg to the Rockies and Banff. I'm traveling across Canada, rewinding the clock to share the stories of over a century ago before they're forgotten forever, along with some hidden gems nestled along the way, including next week where we will continue this series by train, heading east out of the Northern Rockies in Jasper and into the prairies for a stop in the city that I was born in, Winnipeg, as we continue this journey towards Montreal. I'm curious, have you ever stayed here? Have you worked here? Do you have a story about the lodge? Or do you think that the chateau architecture that Grand Trunk Pacific wanted to build is better than what they have today? Whatever it is, I'd love to hear in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I cannot wait to see you next week in the next episode of the Grand Railway Hotels of Canada series. I'll see you then.